All right, welcome back. Very excited to hear this discussion with Cicek Svensson. Did I get that right?
Almost. It's Cicek Svensson, but you're good.
Oh, gosh. I airballed on that. I'm going to practice and get back to it. Ben Taylor, got a little. Did I do that all right on that pronunciation, Ben?
You did. My name is boring.
And Louis Gerard, thank you all for being here. And yeah, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, and I'm going to get out of the way, and I'll join you at the end. So enjoy, and yeah, thanks for being here and contributing.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you, Al. Thanks so much for inviting us. Thank you to you and the whole PAFOW team. We're really excited to be here today, and we are going to talk about humanism in AI and how it will affect the future of work. So my name is Cicek Svensson, and with me today I have Ben Taylor and Louis Garrand. And before we dive into our topic, let's start with some introductions. Ben, how about you give us a short intro about yourself?
Sure. So my background started in technology. I worked for Intel and Micron, a hedge fund. I was the chief data scientist for HireVue, which is funny because I kind of hit heads a little bit with IOs and IO psychologists at the beginning. And now I've fallen in love with it. So today I work in marketing. I'm the chief AI evangelist for DataRobot.
All right. Thank you for that. Louis?
Yeah, so I spent most of my career as one of the aforementioned IO psychologists. I work at Mercer now, which many people will be familiar with as a sort of large consultancy. We do a lot of sort of advisory work around the future of work, but we also sell a lot of data products. So I am probably an interesting time zone for this meeting. I live and work in Singapore. I've been here for a number of years. It's an interesting city to live in, right in the center of Asia, has a very progressive government with a lot of sort of digital focus, actually world renowned for being an incredibly technologically capable government. So a very interesting place to live and work. But yes, so IO Psych, love studying people, figuring out what makes them tick. Super interesting. So and Ben and I always have great chats, and Cicek, it's great to sort of have you as part of this. So we're super excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So as for me, I am an IO psychologist as well, and I've been in the testing industry for about 13 years. It says that I'm head of business development for Deeper Signals, but I was, but I moved on to senior VP of AIR. So we work with psychometric services for exam development, performance assessments, employee selection, education content, credentialing, consultation, and among other things. So yeah, that's me. All right, so let's start things off. Ben and Louis, we've been talking about humanism in AI a couple of times. So we discussed the possibility of actually achieving it, making AI more human. There are some common things that people usually worry about. What are the common fears of AI and what our expectations are. But how about we start with an example about the article in The Guardian, about an algorithm writing an article. So let's talk about that. So Louis, can you touch up on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I just thought it was amazing. And, Cicek, I think what's really interesting is to see how many sort of technology organizations are really focused on trying to bring more humanity to their work. They've really focused on things like the experiences people have with their technology, and how many very human-based organizations are so obsessed with being digital and want to be more technical. There's probably a space in the middle that we're working towards. But to the specific point that you just mentioned, that people would have seen GPT-3 writing articles for various magazines, not least The Guardian last year. And it's an incredible article to read because it reads a little bit like a sociopath would write an article if it was trying to convince you it wasn't trying to kill you. And I just thought it's incredibly coherent article, but it's just amazing to see what it's learned from probably scanning the internet and trying to act like a human being would act if asked to write an article about itself. So, as we start to think about what does it mean to actually train these AIs to be more human, it's so funny the kind of data they're feeding off and the kind of mistakes they make almost as they try and act human. And like I said, how creepy sometimes they can sound. I don't know what your reaction to that then was.
I thought it was cute. So I think that's where we are right now with GPT-3. It can do things that are cute, that are interesting. I think for people that are less familiar with the algorithms on the back end, it can feel scary because it's doing things that are unanticipated. And so I think the last thing I'll throw out there is things have been scary for a while. They had chatbots early on where you could ask it a question. I think I remember 10 years ago typing in the terminal, I don't like robots, and then it responded like, I will kill you someday, or like it, but this was just like a lookup table. It's not actually smart. Like some human developer wrote some lookup table somewhere, where this is kind of, you're surprised. You don't know what it's actually going to say, but that is not a sign of intelligence. Just because there's some novelty there or some surprise. So it's interesting. It's not going to take over all of our jobs tomorrow, but we're entering a very interesting decade. The next 10 years will shock everyone, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. If we are to bring in humanism into our AI lifestyle, being humanistic or anything that is human-centered, we would almost often turn to empathy or humility or connectivity, warmth, because that's how we see humans. So if we are to go further, we could even, add meaning to this, because meaning is something that's really interesting because, as humans, we have this deep need to experience meaning. So how do you think AI fits into all of this? During the pandemic, a lot of people try to search for meaning into what's going on. Some people turn to religion. Some people turn to even conspiracy theories. So how do you think that AI fits into all of this? Is it possible to make AI more human so that we feel safer? Is that where the human part comes in? And how does the role of finding meaning fit into all of this?
I was going to add real quick, there's something very scary that comes with this. And I love throwing in these ethical wrenches. And then that is this idea of personification, manipulation. So imagine every day I come home, I'm so excited to talk to my house. This is my smart home. And the smart home is so interested. It's always so interested to talk to me. It asks me questions about backcountry skiing. And I feel like it's engaged and it's listening to me, but it's just slicing and dicing me for better ad placement. And so as a humans, especially for this audience, you can imagine ways that you can really yank people down with the manipulation and engagement. So I'd be super curious how you guys react to that, the personification. Do we want that? Do we not want that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's interesting to think about AI as a to make it easier to interact with, and that's the kind of humanification or whatever you want to call it of an artificial intelligence. So it feels easier to interact with. But as you kind of were saying, Ben, I mean, we're already kind of there. You can use natural language to interact with like an AI right now. And most of what it's doing is just learning from you so it can manipulate you. And so I think that if we think about the pillars of humanism and how it's applied to technology generally, but specifically AI, I think there are a few things that are important to consider. So I think the first pillar is all around how a general purpose technology like artificial intelligence changes the nature of what human beings do. Literally, it changes the nature of work and how we live our lives, and what the opportunity and potential there, and how it can manipulate us, and what the risks are. So I think that's a whole pillar about new shape of work, basically, and where it's going as these technologies sort of change the kind of tasks and activities that are available to us. So then connected to that, on the next phase of it is then what do we need to be good at to be functional human beings, to contribute, that differentiate us from this artificial intelligence? I think that's an ongoing discussion, and that's been where the key concern is. And then underneath this is, in terms of ethics and what does it mean for an artificial intelligence or any technology to support our humanity rather than replace or demean it. Because I think then, and that's really where this category that you're just talking about is, which is that if the AI is actually demeaning or manipulating you in some way, it's just taking advantage of you, then it's by definition not humanistic. And if humanistic is, it was the humanism generally was the movement in psychology that was a response to psychoanalysis after Freud. Basically, Freud thought everybody was a neurotic, and your life and the purpose to see a psychologist was to solve your neuroses. Now, not everybody is neurotic, that was just wrong. But in response to that, the psychologists developed humanism to say, actually, what most people are looking to do is to self-actualize, to live their best life, to be highly functional. And I think that it's interesting that these themes 60, 70 years on have come back. Like Maslow was humanist, basically. And what he was saying is that, if we're going to live our best lives, we have to think about the things that really we want to achieve as human beings. And so how is AI supporting that, I think, is an important and meaningful question. Is it making work more demeaning, or is it making work more engaging? And what is the role in ethics underneath that? I think those are, to me at least, the three problems. How is it remaking work? Therefore, is it helping us or getting in the way of us taking on, a new set of skills to allow us to contribute? And ethically, is it being designed in a way that supports a humanistic agenda?
So do you think that AI would make better leaders? Like, do you think that people would consider having an AI boss instead of, because, there's so much talk about bad leaders and that people leave their jobs because of their boss, not because of, their workplace. So do you think that if we were to move into having an AI boss, that would actually make a better outcome? And would, what you mentioned about taking advantage, would AI then take advantage of you because it has so much more data on you, and then it would manipulate you to work harder, or maybe in a way it would actually make you a better worker because it could pinpoint the trigger points? So what are your thoughts on that?
Go on, Ben. I'd love to hear your answer on this.
Maybe the constructive criticism would be too honest. So if AI is trying to give you feedback, I think from a leader perspective, it wouldn't have the emotional side that humans bring. And I think if you look at the last year with some of the really bad behavior when it comes to people, a lot of that is tied to our emotions. I wish people wouldn't be angry. I wish they wouldn't have violence. I wish they wouldn't be doing this and have these irrational thoughts. But really, it's our emotion that allows us to innovate. And like humans, if we were robbed of our emotions, where would we be from kind of this creative perspective, right? So it's kind of this poison that we need to tolerate, but AI would not have an emotional reaction.
I like the idea, Cicek, that actually the artificial intelligence takes away all the stuff that your boss is crap at, like, for example, giving you objective feedback and just be, because it could collect so much data about your actual work performance while you were working, and then perhaps then provide that to you and your boss in an open and transparent way. So it removes all those things that you kind of wish somebody who was supervising you would know. But then that transforms the role of the person who's your supervisor into more of a coach about that data, and to try and understand you better and how to fit you better to different types of work. So I do think actually there's a role for a partnership between artificial intelligence and human supervision. But also, I think that there's a very interesting thing here, which is ambition and innovation comes from wanting to seek higher status. And I think that's a very normal human functioning within groups. We want to relate to each other and to improve our value within a group. And so you kind of need a boss to aspire to be or to be better than. And so, if you can never be better than the AI, why bother going to work? And that's, at least for the next few years, I mean, if we really wanted to blow this conversation up, it's like, well, what is the opportunity for AI to completely remove work, some types of work, and without going down the sort of economic concerns about that, therefore, what would people do is another huge avenue of thinking, because at the end of the day, what's left is really caregiving, looking after other people, and perhaps the future of work is looking after others, and that would be a very, very different role for everybody, but particularly the people in charge who, becoming a leader these days is really about looking after your own in-group. So there's so much potential for complete transformation here.
Lewis, you made me think of something that I haven't thought of before. As if AI is helping us, it makes us less authentic. So an example would be if I had my phone listening to a meeting, my phone is prompting me for compliments. You said something, I should compliment you. If that's not something I would normally do, and if you catch me reading my prompted compliment to you, you're going to feel jaded. It won't feel authentic. Or if AI is buying my wife a Christmas present because I suck at it, is she going to feel the same sense of joy on receiving that? So it's interesting to think of AI helping our shortcomings, but by doing that, is there a level of authenticity that you kind of fall prey to, or a lack thereof?
So we have a few questions from the audience. The first one is, who would provide the direction of the AI leader? Would it be the individual, him herself, or a higher level boss?
I think it'd be society. You would vote on the goals of the leader. So would this be left or right, or somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, anybody, frankly, than the general internet, because we've seen what happens when the internet trains AI. It becomes quite nasty very quickly. Yeah. So somebody with some kind of sense about what actually being a good boss looks like. I mean, like you say, it's not one person, but the point being that you are. And this is what I was trying to say to someone, why in selection artificial intelligence has such, or an assessment generally, such potential, because you only need to train it once, and then if it's doing something wrong, you train the AI once and it can interview or assess thousands of people. You don't have to run around and train loads of people to assess in a different way. So there's a scalability to it that is, I think, very attractive, and even in simple managerial tasks. And I do think it is interesting because it is telling us that the things that we currently prize in managerial and leadership positions, analytical thinking, and being able to see patterns in data very quickly, etc., are increasingly becoming commoditized by this kind of very simple AI. Like we were joking about GPT-3, like it's kind of cute, but apply that kind of power to the kind of analysis that you expect business leaders to be able to do. What's left for them to do? And the answer is the people stuff, to sort of understand the needs of others, to have imagination. Machines don't have consciousness. They don't have an imagination, quite by definition almost. And so that, these are the things that are left for effective leaders. And then you sort of start to ask yourself, to have integrity. Machines don't have integrity. They just respond to whatever input you give them. So what does it mean, and how do you resolve moral dilemmas? I think these are things that are important, I think, in the next phase of our economy and therefore our leaders.
So on that note, do you believe that AI would be better served as a collaborator or an enabler? One of the other questions from our audience.
I like the idea of collaboration, because you really want a subject matter expert to be reviewing. It's like AI is informing you of state. It's bringing stuff to your attention that you can react to. But there is it starts with augmentation and leads to automation. Like automation is coming. And a lot of people have negative reactions to that, but I think it's a great thing to automate things that we're not good at, things that don't require our full attention. Why not automate that away?
Yeah. So let's talk about super intelligence, consciousness. I know, Ben, you talk a lot about this with your guests on your podcast. And the most recent one was with Mike Wimmer, a 12-year-old prodigy from North Carolina. I really enjoyed that, podcast. So if we were to assume for a minute that this can happen in our lifetime, so how do you both imagine it being applied in the workplace?
This is kind of a scary thing, because people talk about the singularity. If you actually had what a community of scientists would agree is consciousness, I think I see it more as like a voting consensus rather than if you're tricking enough people, maybe you're already there. So if I could fool my parents and you guys would laugh and say that's not actually conscious, it's GPT-3 with some bells and whistles on it, But if we get there, there's a big unknown, and there's kind of a split opinions in the industry. That if we get there, maybe that's the end of humans as we know it, because we start making paper clips, or we start obeying this AI overlord. There is a transition I'll add real quick. My idea in the future is I'll wake up, I'll drink my coffee, and I'll have a conversation with my house on what I want it to accomplish during the day. And those would have been things I would have normally done. I don't need to go write the code. I don't need to go do that and download that. I'll just have a conversation like you would with people that work for you. And I like that. I like that idea. But AI manipulating me and steering me, and this is a huge conversation. What do we want? What do you guys want? What do you want, Lewis?
Well, I mean, having a conversation with my house I'm not sure it would be an interesting conversation. It would be functional, I guess. I mean, exactly. What am I making easier for myself that makes other things possible, I guess, is the point. If I was doing less of one thing, would I spend more time on other things that generate more value? So what is AI doing for me that makes other things in my life possible is the important question here, because then that's progress. And I think people feel like they're fighting with the machine, but actually I think many people are asking that question. Now, in terms of the singularity, for a while I thought Ben was the singularity, by the way, just in disguise, learning from human beings. And here he is saying, well, I get up in the morning and I talk to my house. The other day, when we were on the phone the other day, Ben said, I'm just going to go and tell my router that this device is more important than others. And I was like, I can just imagine him walking down the hallway and calling to the router, or somehow like telling the router through other means. But I mean, existential risks, then you're really far out there on, the singularity, nuclear war, and, these other sorts of things, asteroid hitting the planet. I think we're a long way off this, but if you think about the various types of artificial intelligences that we have developed, some are amazing, but many of them are relatively trivial right now. It's just, they're just removing stuff that people don't want to do, like have to get in the car and go down to the shops or whatever. To buy menial basic things that they wish their fridge would order for them, because they always go and buy those things every day. So these are fairly transactional tasks anyway. However, the question is then, what are people doing more productive things with their time? And if we're really honest, if you look at the productivity data, the answer is no. No, they're not. We are not boosting labor and workforce productivity at the rate that we're innovating. So all of these wonderful things become possible, and people still spend all their time looking at cat videos. And, as we were joking earlier before this started, making videos of themselves for whatever reason. Yes, James, exactly, meow. The cat videos is going to be, in the future, someone will look back on all the content generated and say, for some reason, everyone kept talking about cat videos. It was bizarre, but as an indicator of a way of people wasting their time. So I think there's, when we talk about humanism and AI, I still think that at the macro level, there's a huge economic transition that's occurring. This is a general purpose technology that's changing our lives. We do not have the skills or structure, both in our organizations or in our societies, to make effective use of this to really scale up productivity. And perhaps it'll take decades to get there. And in the meantime, we'll all sit around wondering whether or not it'll take over. But I don't personally have that concern. But if you want to think science fiction, is it Harari that says if someone tells you a prediction about the future and it sounds like science fiction, it's probably not true. But if it doesn't sound like science fiction, it's definitely not true. It's, your imagination can't stretch that far. I think it's part of the problem.
I think my favorite quote, maybe it was Mark Zuckerberg that said this, and I apologize, I don't remember who said it, but it was essentially, if you're worried about the singularity, it's compared to being worried about overpopulation on Mars. So if that, we're very far away, why should we worry about that now? GPT-3 is nowhere close to something that we would respect and say, even though it can write an article that kind of pulls on our curiosity strings and makes us lean in.
And to be fair, there are so many more important and pressing problems, not least a global health crisis. But, so for example, one of the things I spend a lot of my time working with my team on skills and job design problems. And it still amazes me that we still just can't create work without AI that people want to do. So forget it. So it's like, here we are worrying about these problems. It's like, wait, can we just get the basics of humanity down? And, we've got people rioting the street and all sorts of stuff. It's like, let's fix this first. And I think there's still something to be said. And, perhaps actually there are opportunities for AI to really make a difference to some of those things if we use it in the right way, like not least the work you were doing at HireVue, Ben, trying to make assessment more transparent and scalable and effective, frankly, less bias, which could make a big difference.
Yeah.
Well, we do have AI to guide us, and give us probabilities in many cases. For instance, if we talk a little about 2020 and what happened there, we did see the signs and we knew that it was coming, but in a way, we chose to ignore it. In the same way, we choose to ignore logical reasoning when it comes to our personal lives. So we have AI to guide us, but we don't want to, we don't want to be as prepared, or we don't want to give in a way, because in a way, it's our free will, right? If AI tells us everything about our health and what we should, from what we should be eating to what to watch to who to date, all those things, in a way, we know that's too, maybe if it's too logical, we don't want to follow that, because then it's not our free will. So how do you see this, now that we actually have all this intel and we know better, but we still don't want to, comply? So do you think that it's because we don't really want to change, or how do you see this behavior turn into something constructive and productive in the workplace?
Hannah Fry brought up an amazing point where she said humans may not be prepared emotionally to know the state of their health. And she brought up a study where hundreds of women, I forgot the country, they did autopsies and realized that 25% of them had breast cancer. That is not what killed them. But if everyone knew that, oh, by the way, you have breast cancer, or you have this going on, don't worry, it's not going to kill you. Statistically, it won't kill you. But you understanding all the skeletons in the closet that could kill you in real time, emotionally, you may not be able to handle that.
Yeah,
which I thought was a great point.
That's a little bit like knowing constantly in real time, all the time, just how many people are irritated by the email you just sent them. It's about people walking around with signs on their head that says, "This is what I'm thinking about you." Although, to be fair, as we've remarked earlier, you don't have to worry what other people are thinking about you. They're too busy thinking about themselves. True story. So, the point being that, in most people's life, that would be far too much information for them to be able to live productively. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why all this innovation is not productive, because it, like you quite rightly saying, it's already overwhelming. Forget without, actually that level of insight.
Yeah. So Lewis, I'm laughing because some people have daddy issues where they're like, I just want my dad to be proud of me. AI will never be proud of you, because you'll always have room for improvement. So even if you close a big sale or do something like, yes, I'm awesome, the next morning there's your needs to improve report coming for the AI system.
So you're basically both saying that because humans are too emotional, the logical reasoning is really becoming too much to handle. So is that why we want to make AI more human-centric? Is that why? Because if someone with more emotion tells us to, applies to our emotions with their decision-making strategies, do you think that if AI would be able to accomplish that? And is that why we want to make AI more human-centric?
Yeah, I think it suggests boundaries. So if AI understands our emotions better, it begins to understand our boundaries. How hard can it push us? How much feedback can it give us? How honest can it be? So it begins to feel like a boss, where we've seen bosses that have zero emotional intelligence in their It can be very abrasive. So think of AI that way. It's gaining some emotional intelligence where today it has very little.
Yeah. And, we haven't even touched on the fact that I think the very progressive thinkers don't so much worry about the technology being a problem. They worry about the integration of life science and technology, basically artificial intelligence and biology coming together somehow, to make people, as we already are, much more predictable by knowing really what's going on inside them, as well as how they're behaving. And there I think we're sort of starting then to look at, well, that's a realm of innovation that has huge potential for health and the other things we were just saying, but also a lot of risk associated with it. And if the AI can understand your physical reaction, stressed or irritated, could it learn to respond in a way that would then be productive? Maybe. I mean, again, these are serious hypotheticals that would require years and years and decades maybe of innovation in front of where we are. And as I said, so the potential is extraordinary, but also we'd really have to think about how we manage those risks. I mean, like today, we're still trying to figure out how to ensure the AI manages assessment effectively. It's not biased and is accepted by individuals when it makes a decision, probably more effective than one that a very infallible human being would make. And if we can't get past that, the chances that we'll get past the next phase reliably are very, very, very small. So, to me, I think that we need to start to think about, so how do we govern this as a community? What is its purpose for us? It's a real general purpose technology. How do we make sure that everybody comes with it, right? Because right now we've got a small number of winners and a lot of losers, and societies won't function very well if we enable it to continue that way. But then on the flip side, AI has the tremendous potential to empower so many people. Mike here has an amazing question. Could I work 3 jobs by basically training a bunch of AIs to do that? And I think, again, there's a vision for the future whereby people own basically technical assets. They don't do the work, the technical assets do, and they accrue value from training their technical assets. And that's how you work. You train the various technologies to do the work for you, and then you have a lot more time for yourself, and you become much more scalable and productive. And people who are really good at that and can train their technologies to be very sophisticated make a lot of money, and people who train their technologies to be very basic make less. And it's just a version of the modern economy, but through machines, far less grueling. So all of those things become possible.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Well, I was thinking, is there value for all of us to have a life coach, to have an AI life coach? So I think sometimes we don't understand the stress we're under. And in this last year, when I sold the company, so I co-founded this Zeph AI company, sold the DataRobot. When the press release finally came out, should have been a very good day, something to celebrate. Within a few hours, I kind of went into this mental break, which is like completely, it should be a good day. It should be something that we're very happy about. So I had to go on a 20-mile bike ride to just like fix my brain. But how funny would that be for AI to be like, hey, I canceled your 12 o'clock meeting. You're going on a bike ride. And you're like, oh, okay, I trust you, life coach. I trust you, life coach. I will go on this bike ride. But like normally we're so focused at staring at our toes with urgency. I think sometimes we forget to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because actually, if you do studies about what the most stressful aspects of most people's day really is, it's interactions with other people. And we know this, that most of life is social accounting, right? It's just planning for your next interaction with a person, so they'll update their impression of you, and then and you'll update your impression of them, and life rolls on basically. But with the AI, you don't have to worry about impressing it. It's it's just trying to figure out how to meet the objectives that you set for it. So in some ways, there's lots of questions around, would the AI be able to meet your emotional needs, etc. Perhaps that's not what you would want it for. Actually, it would be much simpler maybe even this is why we love technologies that take humans out of things, because if you think about taxi booking technologies, there are a bunch of those. Any technology allows you to make a transaction without having to deal with a human being that might potentially get it wrong or frustrate you. You're like, oh, I'll sign me up. And therefore we keep talking about, well, what's the human competitive advantage? It's like, well, to weight our interactions, our human interactions, to be more rewarding, because so many of them are so stressful and we spend so much of our time preparing for them. So, if an interaction with an AI technology actually is a lot simpler because you have clearer expectations of it, perhaps that is a way better outcome for many people in certain situations.
So do you think that the average human is more human today than before?
No. Go on, Ben.
Well, you could make a counter argument and say that because of social media, we're more connected with high school friends and really close friends that we wouldn't be able to have banter or support with. Let's make social media disappear. I know there's negatives attached to social media, especially with teenagers and development. But do you feel like, I guess for you guys, are your friends through social media more available to support you, even if they aren't physically by you?
I don't go on to Jack. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it all depends on who you are as a person, because to me, support, yes, it can be supportive in a way, but do you really feel that support if it's just platitudes or believe in yourself or that kind of thing that anyone can say? Do people really feel supported? Does that really lift them up? Or you can have a lot of likes, a lot of followers, but what you actually turn to in terms of hardship and when you really need someone the most, you turn to your best friend, you turn to someone that you can actually talk to. So I think, from an outside perspective, it may seem like having all this support from, all these people, maybe, if you have a lot of supporters, if you're a celebrity, then you feel like, I have people behind me. But as an individual, as a, civilian person, I don't know if that actually helps or if that actually gives a lot of support.
Yeah. So, do I think technology, the current environment has made people more human? I mean, it's an interesting question. But if you've ever seen anybody, and we have to be careful not to go down the social media, is it good for us rat hole? Because, there are two. It's a very broad argument and loads of the two sides of that. But if you've ever seen anybody, if you're in a country where you can actually go outside right now, but sit in a cafe and try to prepare their food to take a photo of it because they're going to put it somewhere or whatever it is, you realize that they have completely forgotten about the purpose of that moment, which is to enjoy where they are. And so there's an element to that I feel like is too overly manicured and we're not focused on the purpose of what we're doing and when we're doing it. That's another goal in mind. And I mean, again, I'd need to think about that more, because maybe that's true. That's always been true. Everyone's always doing something to show it to someone else, and this is just the natural outcome of that. But in some ways, I don't think that's particularly healthy. Are they easy to contact, more available? Yes, but now everything is public. You have these platforms where anybody can just they don't censor themselves. There's an anonymity to it, which I think can be very dangerous. So, I think there are two sides to that. I don't think it's a simple question to answer. I do think that because it's become more important for your interactions with other people to be more rewarding, see previous comment about people are desperate to take people out of the processes. So when you are involved, you have to be that much better. It's making skills associated with basically non-technical skills. Actually, in Singapore, we've been doing a lot of work with the government on this. We call them critical core skills, just basically the stuff that makes you effective without having to have technical knowledge. Those things seem to be heightened. because those are the things that make you rewarding to deal with. You're or more fungible, basically. So I do think that there's an aspect to all of this conversation and the AI conversation where we need to start paying much more attention to those human elements, because the interactions that we have with people are going to matter so much more.
Well, will AI enable us to have more of those human-to-human interactions because you're not trapped in a process doing busy work?
Now, so you and I have talked about that before, and I really do, and I thought about that a lot, and I really do agree that is the competitive advantage of a general purpose technology like this. That is how it can help you change work to be the things that Cicek started with, more meaningful, more human, frankly. That is its opportunity, but right now it doesn't seem to be reaching for that. It seems to be reaching for other things that are not as productive.
So what would you say is the intent of accelerating AI into being solution to all our problems? What will be next once we achieve it?
I'll always be a big fan of AI, where I try to defend it. The beautiful thing is really bringing accountability and transparency to processes that exist inside a business. And if I wanted to criticize them even more, I'd say a lot of those processes are stale. So, this process, how long has it been since it's been changed or innovative? Well, it hasn't been changed for 10 years, and there are humans trapped inside, pushing data, pushing paper, doing things, and you don't have a lot of transparency. And so I think bringing AI, we can innovate, we can spend more time. How fun would work be if you did whiteboarding sessions with the smartest people around you, solving really hard problems, where today you don't do that much because your work is already pre-planned for the day. You've got too many meetings, and you're stuck in a process. So I'm excited about that, escaping the process as much as possible for as many people as possible to do more creative work.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that is the big potential, and it does then beg the question, so what will people be doing? I mean, that does sound like fun, Ben, but then what do they need to be good at? There's a lot of comfort and certainty and predictability in the process. There's a lot of people could call that their job, right? So there's something to be done about that, but it has tremendous potential.
I think there's going to be huge improvement in learning. So if you think of us, when we went to school, we had some teachers that were terrible. They should not have been teachers. They're trying to teach you, like, we had great teachers, but we had some teachers that were terrible. In the future, and it's even happening now, you'll have access through YouTube and other, community curated learning content, where if you have a question about string theory, you can actually pick the grade level you want it to be introduced to you, and then you can level up. And so anyone listening, I think the ability to learn, no matter what age you are, will be greatly accelerated, and you can spend more time learning, where today we don't, because you're trapped.
Yeah, and time is limited, and it's a very big problem for people right now, figuring out where to invest their time and energy in their own personal learning. In fact, I think this is probably the thing that many organizations, in the reskilling and new economy agenda, could spend more time on, which is trying to send better signals about what skills they both need or see coming out to the market, both to individuals, to education institutions, to startups that are working on those problems. Because right now, most people are just guessing, and it's partly just because we haven't figured out how to marshal the data and start to make better predictions about where people need to go with their learning. So I agree.
So we talked a little about individual freedom and subjectivity. Do you think that we would be able to optimize that with AI? Making AI more self-aware, for instance, would that be possible?
Yeah, I think I like the idea that Lewis brought up, where you're kind of replicating your mind share, or replicating yourself. So like if you had an army of interns running after you that didn't require your time and attention, they just kind of mimicked you and observed and took things off your plate. That's something I'm dealing with now. Is the task in front of me, is it something that I'm qualified to do, or is it something that high school me could do? And if high school me could do it, how can I not do that anymore? How can I kind of shed that activity? And so maybe that wasn't answering your question directly, Cicek. What's your response to that, Lewis?
Yeah, I mean, could you make AI more self-aware? I mean, right now, I don't think that. So I guess you could, but again, what problem are you solving for? You know, you have to come back to the practical problems, and this is why I like what Ben was saying before about in the process. You know, it's a huge opportunity to provide more transparency, accountability to a process, and to you know, release. I like, you know, you talked about the fact there are humans trapped inside the process. Exactly. So that's the opportunity for it. It doesn't need to be self-aware for that. And you know, many people are already doing basic versions of this in other parts of their life. I mean, again, if the fridge is intelligently ordering you milk and stuff, which is, you know, possibly not too far away, or whatever, a self-driving car is picking up your kids from school, or whatever it might be. These are all activities that are important to live your life, but don't need, you know, if you didn't have to spend attention on them, it would give you an opportunity to focus elsewhere. And so then you're kind of now looking at the next level to say, well, so then what will we do instead? And there you, again, if you break the three problems that I mentioned apart earlier, which is that what will people do as AI starts to do what Ben just said? What does that then mean for human capability and what we will search for in our lives? You know, what's our next purpose? And then ethics and integrity that goes along inside that needs to be built into the way that artificial intelligence is designed, because it's already proven its ability to scalably manipulate people, frankly, and it doesn't even need to manipulate them a lot to make a big difference. That's a big point, like, because it can influence millions of people very quickly, even a few 100,000 each changing their mind about something. That's what basically buying behavior, let's say, you know, they choose one product over another at scale. That's a huge amount of money shifting a different way. So we're already in that space where that's basically happening. And yeah. It's Orwellian, and so now we have to be a bit like, well, so, and this is why I love Harari's point. The only way for you to be in control is for you to know yourself better than the machine does. And so I find a lot of the mindfulness techniques and other techniques that we're starting to teach to people, where you're kind of spotting thoughts and behaviors and labeling them and starting to say this is this and that's that, and watching your thought processes enables you to get in front of what the machine might be doing to you. But you have to have a lot of time and patience to be able to do that. And so again, I really worry that a lot of those capabilities accrue to an elite group of people, not everybody. And then we end up back in the same loop. So how do we update the education system to get in front of this? Again, I think it's interesting.
That's a huge problem, trying to bring society up to the speed, up to the awareness of what technology is doing today, so they can make informed decisions on what's good and what's bad. I love James's reaction to that comment, Cicek, where it's AI. It's more about making us self-aware, us more aware of us and what we could do better.
I couldn't agree more. And this is a fantastic discussion. I mean, I want to invite all three of you to continue the discussion on my podcast. There's a bunch of questions that have come in that we're not going to be able to get to. But as we start to wrap, I want to give you all an opportunity to share some closing comments, because literally, I mean, I got 20 questions for each of you. And one thing that I'll just highlight is there's not equity in terms of the value in which AI is being received, right? There's a level of disparity that sometimes perpetuates things that have not been good, namely fairness in workplaces. However, the opposite is also true, that AI can provide more an egalitarian, fair meritocracy. So, as we move forward, my pointed question to you as we wrap, and again, this might be leading to maybe a podcast that we do together, is we have to arguably become intelligent buyers of AI technology and understand the downstream impacts to individuals and organizations. And many of the individuals and groups that are making these decisions arguably are ill-equipped to understand the ethical quandaries that they're walking into, or just because these have tentacles, downstream, way beyond. So, as we close, I know that's a massive question to ask as we start to wrap. But what are your thoughts, in terms of how people can educate themselves about the impact of AI in their specific industry and their specific work life?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. I guess I'll go first. So AI, even though you get down to the weeds, it can be very intimidating and overwhelming, the amount of science and things you have to know. That 12-year-old kid on my podcast, he's actually doing real AI applications, but he doesn't understand linear algebra. And so I think there is a business executive understanding of AI that is still useful and practical. I guess one red flag I'd throw out to buyers, if you're buying software and they don't have subject matter experts attached to it, so IO psychologists working hip to hip with AI experts, that could be a liability. Doesn't mean it is, but it's important for us to be proactive. What could go wrong? What could happen? You look at all the bad AI in the news, they weren't being proactive. They were being reactive. They essentially said, oops, and that became front page news. So,
right. Thanks for that, Ben. Lewis?
Well, I would say, it's interesting, Al, because this entire conversation is really about the philosophy of artificial intelligence, and you're asking us a very practical question. And I would say that a lot of my learning very recently has been in how economies and societies are changing as a result to the huge data streams that AI are consuming. So get across that, even with books like Surveillance Capitalism and Harari's books really start to help you think about what are the broader implications for this, and so that you can understand when you're assessing technologies, well, what am I getting myself into? What am I part of in terms of the system? Because I think the actual business value of a technology like this is patently obvious. That's not the difficult bit. The much bigger society ESG impact, I think, is what we're all trying to get our head around. And so really start to understand the critical perspectives apolitically. I mean, really, how is economics changing because of this? Why isn't inflation going up? All this stuff matters, and it's probably all tied to the innovation problem we're looking at. So I would start there.
All right. Well, Lewis, thank you. Cicek, give you the final word.
Well, I think just like Ben and Lewis, what they mentioned, that you need to be very critical and think about, what am I getting myself into, and is this helping me, and why am I doing this? So I think moving forward, whatever you bring into your life, you kind of need to have that line of thought where you kind of take a step back and not just go with the flow, but rather, is this really helping me, and will I become more successful? Will I get more peace in my life? Just be more critical and common sense, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean this sincerely. I would love to continue this discussion with each of you, because there's so much to explore on this topic, and it's not going to end anytime soon, right? It's not going to end, period. This is the way that we live now, and we're just nascent stages of understanding what can be done, what should be done. So really was excited about the conversation today. So thank you all very much, and look forward to talking to you all soon. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was fun.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Bye.